Skinty Fia by Fontaines D.C., released on April 22nd, 2022, produced by Dan Carey. This album was Fontaines D.C. third album. What we're going to do here is we're going to talk through 10 questions that we agreed upon beforehand to use as a framework to talk through this album. Start off with the first question, which is what makes this album interesting. And to me, I hear all too often bands aren't relevant anymore. Bands aren't where it's at. And I get that. If you look at like what's the most popular streaming on the streaming artists on Spotify, if you look at charts, especially in the US, you're going to see that a lot of that reflected back at you. But I think here's a band making just brilliant, emotionally charged, genre defiant guitar music in 2022. And that alone proves that this form still has teeth. This is also a band on the ascendant. When we're recording this is 3 years later, and they have had another album called Romance that I also think is a really good album. I specifically wanted to talk about this album for those reasons that I mentioned. And I also think that there is this thing about a band in their prime, finding their voice and discovering that in real time, and to be plugged into that I think is super cool. I think that this is evolving something into something deeper than their previous work, than their first two albums, Doggerel and Hero's Death, which I also loved those albums and still love those albums. This album is also about alienation. It's about a longing for home. This album was recorded by Fontaines D.C. as they lived in London, having previously, they're from Dublin and having lived in Ireland. And this album is filled with that. It's filled with reflecting on what it means to have those cultural roots, to be separated from them, and to fight to remember that. I think this album is very much about a fight to remember what you're not supposed to forget, which is where you came from, and all of the ways that matters, and how the environment that you're in isn't necessarily encouraging that. It's encouraging you to be the same. It's encouraging you to be like everybody else. And it's a fight to retain what you came from. So I know that this album for me is like, I came upon this album the day it was released. I was ready for it. I was plugged into this band for 5 years at this point. And for you, I think this was a band where I'm like, hey, check this band out. Check this out. So this was not like you were not plugged into this, not ready for this when it came out. And you're now kind of getting more exposed to Fontaines DC. So I'm interested to hear what you think makes this album interesting.
Well, the first reason I thought, why should I check this out, or why is it interesting? Number one is because it's the critics love it and fans seem to love it. And I am old and lame and I'm out of touch with what is current and cool. And so that's why I was interested in it. Let me check out what the buzz is about. And then, you're a fan. I trust your taste. You've helped me find good music for 30 plus years now. So I trusted your recommendation. Now, after getting into it, what do I think? Why is it interesting to me? I think, I hadn't thought about it until you said things about like the bands are dying, or why there are no bands anymore. Bands is a thing of the past. I hadn't really thought about it, but I guess it could be true. With technology, everything's moving toward technology, and um, you don't have those great guitar bands like we had in the classic rock days, and in the what's considered classic rock now in our youth of the 90s. So I think that is interesting about Fontaines DC and about Skinty Fia is this is a guitar rock album, drums, guitars. We're not messing with technology and synthesizers and drum machines. This is, getting back to our roots of rock and roll. So I think the vocals are interesting and different. You mentioned the lyrics. I in my research of Fontaines D.C. I saw that they were all fans of poetry. They met in school for music and were all fans of poetry. And I think you see that in the lyrics. So I think that makes this album interesting. I think the drumming is amazing. I think the we live in an era of beats, and I love beats. I love dance music, and this is an album that is filled with great drumming that gives you great rhythm without the use of technology and drum machines. So that's what makes Skinty Fia interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because when you think about that narrative, that like there's not this. You're right. You can make an album without collaborating with anybody, and bands are inherently collaborative. Everything that you hear is emerges from the collaboration from all of these different voices inside a band, and and also I think that there are plenty of other bands and albums that could also take this mantle and be like, here's why this form still matters. Here's why bands are still relevant. And we'll talk about, when we talk about some contemporaries of Fontaines DC, I'll mention some of the bands that I think like could totally fill that bill here too. But I think that this album, for that reason and for all the things that I mentioned, is a pretty good encapsulation of where we're at and where things are going. So glad to hear that you enjoyed those aspects of it. I know that this, so I think that for you, the discovering of this is very recent. So I won't ask you the earliest memory of this album, but I will talk a little bit about me, and I will say that I first heard about Fontaines DC before their Doggerel came out, before their first album came out. They were releasing singles, and there was just this buzz about the band. You would hear people talk about Fontaines DC, and there was no album to go listen to, and that's rare these days to have all of this buzz about this band. And I remember watching their performance on KEXP and really getting it immediately and being like, wow, okay. And then they would keep releasing these singles, and each single I was like, okay, in more and more into it. And then when Doggerel came out in 2018, it's funny because a lot of those songs, they were recorded for the album in a separate session. So I was used to hearing them in a certain way. And then on Doggerel, they sounded a little different. There's always that disconnect when you're used to one version and then you hear another version. The vocals were a little drier, a little less reverb, and I was used to that other version, but I still love Doggerel. I think it's great for this album. So I was ready for Fontaines DC. I was all in when Doggerel came out. I was there the day that it came out. I was excited about it, and it felt fresh, it felt new, and it felt exciting to be back into a world where bands were speaking to me and making music that spoke to me. So when this album came out, I was totally ready for it. I was on my honeymoon. My wife and I were on our honeymoon on the beach, and this came out like right when we got to the beach, and this whole thing I just listened to it on repeat the entire time. And so when I hear this album, when you think of this album, it does not feel like a beach album at all. But that in my head, that's what it is. I remember, like, I can vividly remember all the things that happened on the honeymoon, and all of the things, going out to eat, getting ready, taking a shower, and having the album playing in the background while I'm like in the shower and getting ready, like all these things. It's just watching the waves and listening to this album. So it has a cool personal connection with me too. That always shades how you feel about things. But that's my answer to that question. We can get back into this though here, where I think that we can. I will throw this one to you. So you've heard this. What are the standout tracks for you off of Skinty Fia?
Standout tracks for me are How Cold Love Is, Jackie Down the Line, I Love You, and Roman Holiday. But my favorite track is, and bear with me because this must be in a different language, In Agria Go Deo. The first track on this album is my favorite. It's just amazing. It puts you in this it puts you in a setting that is very dramatic. When I so so when I'm first listening to this album, um, the Pope dies, and we have a conclave, and I've never seen the movie The Conclave, but I've heard about it, and they're choosing a new pope. I just imagine that Inagria Godeo was playing at the wherever the conclave was going on, because that's just like in the head space that it puts me in when I hear this song, is like a very you know priest in a very what's the word I'm looking for, uh a setting to where it's very formal and spiritual, and we're going through all the ceremonial things that we go through, so but without trying to get too much into my weird headspace here, my favorite track is In Agria Godeo, the first track.
Dude, that's great. It was inspired by a real incident. So it's sung in Irish, and it's uh, apparently an Irish woman who lived in England passed away, and her family wanted that engraved on her mother's gravestone, and the Church of England initially refused to allow that text without an accompanying English translation, claiming that it could be seen as a political slogan. And that decision, the implication that Irishness is inherently political or suspect, which I think in the US, that sounds so like, what? It sounds so out there, but it outraged a lot of people in the Irish community. I think that they taking that and turning it into this song is super cool that they did that. It means in our hearts forever. And it is also kind of a good opening salvo into so many of the themes of this album about, about Irishness in this but even though it's about that, I think this could be about anybody who is in a new environment and trying to hold on to something that is part of what they came from, part of their heritage. So yeah, that's great for me. You named a lot of them. I mean, I love this entire album, but I do think that Roman Holiday is sort of, it's obviously a single off of this album. I think it's a great takeaway. It's just a great song. It's super cool. And it's a very, I think it has a widespread appeal. It has the potential to appeal to a lot of different listeners. So I think Roman Holiday is great. I think the song Skinty Fia is great too. It does have that beat that is sort of hypnotic, and I love that. But yeah, a lot of your picks are they would make my list too. And I guess we can use that to segue into our favorite lyric. What's your favorite lyric on the album?
Let me pull that up here. Baby, come on, whose side are you on? I don't want to see the queen already sing her song. While they're snuffing out hopes and they're blotting out suns, they claim to know the form in which genius comes. Baby, come on, get your high heels on. It's the it's the body is cold, it's the courses run. What artless living, all this soft pain thrills, what calamities usher all our brilliance to the hills. Can you feel it?
That's my choice too. That's it. You nailed it. That's exactly what I had written down.
That's
Wow. Okay.
awesome. Hey man, bro, great minds think alike, but that just shows you um I'm not trying to say, hey, I can nail the thing that sticks out to everybody, but I think that just shows you how good that verse is. If somebody who loves this album for 3 years and that's their favorite thing, and then somebody who just picks it up and is just now getting into it, I think that just tells you how great that verse is.
Absolutely. And the one other one that I had considered, that was my answer, the one that exactly what you read off. But I also think that the across the way moved in a pair with passion in its prime. Maybe they look through to us, hoping it's them in time. I think that's from a song called "The Couple Across the Way," which is kind of the quiet moment in the album before Skinty Fia comes back. But I think that's a beautiful song. It's sort of tender song that's just kind of in the middle of the album and everything else that goes on. But this album is full of lyrics that I think are so interesting. Even the opening song, gone is the day, gone is the night, gone is the day. She defines the only answer. I never had the time. I think that there are so many good lyrics. It's one of the selling points of Fontaines D.C. is the lyrical depth that they have. Gotta love that one.
That can I say something to that too about lyrical depth? I think some lyricists get looked over for um like having some lyricists have lyrical depth without having lyrics that are easy to sing to. I think there's something about using lyrics that on the surface sound pretty um sound pretty plain or straightforward, but then as you take them in context, they have a much deeper meaning that's something to be pondered and something to be grasped. I think Fontaines DC does a good job of that. Is like you were reading the lyrics to the first track. I mean, those words by themselves don't seem to portray a whole lot, but then as you read it in the context of the song, it's like, oh, he's saying something else here. You know, so I appreciate that. I appreciate a lyric that's easy to remember and straightforward language, but also has a much deeper meaning than the words on the surface.
Totally agree with that. Also, I wanted to back up too, because you had mentioned I Love You as a standout track for you. I think that song, I remember when I first heard it, I thought it was good. And it wasn't until I saw them live in Nashville at the Brooklyn Bowl where they closed with that. And it was an amazing show. I mean, they're so good live. I felt very fortunate to be able to go see them. And that song, I was like, wow, this is a powerful song, the way that it escalates toward the end. And I could imagine it being exhausting to sing. I could imagine it, there's a lot of emotion in these things. And, the performative, Grian Chatton's like performative nature over the course of the band. If you watch like that early KXP performance I was talking about, where they're just kind of breaking into public consciousness in the US and probably to a lot of audiences all over the world, he's far more reserved, where he becomes far more engaged physically on stage by the time that I saw them at Brooklyn Bowl when they were touring off this album. So I did want to mention that too. Okay. Peak moment of the album for you. What's the peak moment of Skinty Fia?
Well, I have to go with the peak moment in my favorite song. So it's when the buildup finally burst 4 minutes into In Agria Godeo. You've got that bass line, that bass note just strummed over and over again that almost becomes like a percussion instrument. And this song just slowly builds, and it's building and it's building and it's building. And then all of a sudden they hit that chord for the first time in the song. I didn't look it up to see what that chord is, but it's like, they've just been playing this one chord or note over and over again. And then here comes this big, like major seventh chord or something. And it's like, oh, we're taking another turn. And the momentum builds and builds to even this higher point. And then Grian Chatton, is that how you say his name? You
Yeah,
know,
Grian
he
Chatton.
he sings like it's God, it's God, it's God, it's God, it's
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
And it just, so that's the peak moment for me.
That's great. For me, I think about, there are a lot of different ways to look at that and to answer this question, but I went with Skinty Fia, the song. I remember when I first heard it, I was just like, this doesn't sound like anything else on the album. This is probably a sign of where this band might head. I think Romance kind of bears that out a little bit. I think that Romance is probably a little bit more accessible as an album, and probably represents a shift for the band in sort of a different direction that I don't know if necessarily Skinty Fia hints at as much as I thought at the time that it would have. But I think coming out of The Couple Across the Way into Skinty Fia is a really powerful juxtaposition of this kind of quiet, the accordion and this gentle song that's sort of heartbreaking into Skinty Fia really kind of just like jars you out of the lull of the couple across the way. So I love that. Also, just think that I mean, I could see someone being like Nobokov. The last song on the album is a culmination of sorts and some sort of peak. I remember the sounds in Nobokov are so cool. It's the final song on the album. The sound of that like echoey in Nobokov at the end. I had to seek out the pedal that they used to do that. It was this industrial electronic pedal, and it's so cool. And I actually found the pedal and tried it and got a chance to like play around with it. And it was like to get that cool echoey delay on there was just like, that's it. And then I didn't know what else to do with the pedal because it was like I just wanted to do that with it. So I had to find it just so I could do that. But it's super cool how they found interesting ways to do that. But yes, final answer for me is actually the song Skinty Fia on the album. Okay, next question. Who are Fontaines DC's contemporaries in your mind? Do you have thoughts on that?
I'm sure it's some of your same answers without really knowing a lot about the bands I'm going to tell you, but I picked Idols and Wonder Horse. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
never heard of Wonder Horse, but they popped up and I listened to a couple of their songs and I'm like, yeah, I could see how people would pair these. I've heard you talk about Idols a lot, but I don't
Yeah.
know about the band. But I listened to a couple of their songs and I thought, yeah, this would make sense as a contemporary too. But I don't have a very good frame of reference on any of these bands.
The three that hit me around the same time, I will say Idols hit me a little bit before. They had an album that came out before a lot of these other bands that kind of emerged at this time. But I do think, but Idols also had an album that came out, Joy is an Act of Resistance, that came out around the same time as Doggerel. And or at least the same time that Fontaines DC was kind of hitting the scene for me. And I love Idols. I think you could totally take Idols and choose one of their albums and make it the centerpiece of this question here and making the argument that bands still matter. They have a really strong fan base. And I just love that band. I feel like they explore so much cool territory. They're a great contemporary. I'm a huge fan of a band called Shame. I'm looking forward to music that they're going to be putting out in 2025. So I'm excited for that. I think Shame is different than Idols. They're different than Fontaines DC, but it's totally makes sense in the post-punk sort of genre to have come out around the same time. And another band that I'm just totally fascinated by. I love to me, those bands for a while were my trifecta. It's like, and to a certain extent they still are. It's Fontaines DC, Idols, and Shame. I also think that Squid is a pretty good contemporary of Fontaines DC, another band doing really interesting work. And then the other band that was always paired with Fontaines DC in earlier comparisons was a band called Murder Capital. And I think that they're also a pretty good comparison. They've had an interesting evolution too. I think where they started versus what they're doing now, they have also evolved in a very interesting way. And I'm always curious when they release new music, and I'm all ears for all of those bands. It gets me excited to talk about these bands and these types of music because I do feel like there's this energy and this momentum out there of some really cool movements in music that I think are exciting if you know where to look and you're plugged into it and you give it the time to spend time with it. It's definitely going to be lucrative. So I would suggest to all of those, I would suggest Shame, Idols, Murder Capital, Squid, and then that's a big one for me. So next question: if this album was a movie, what movie would Skinty Fia be?
What I was trying to think of, I was trying to think of what Skinty Fia is. And so I was thinking, okay, this album is cool, it's edgy, it's kind of dark and in your face, and it's a thrill ride. And so I was like, what? So when I was thinking about that movie, and I was wanting something more current, but here's another problem. I'm old and lame, and I haven't seen a movie that was released before like 2010, unless it's like animated and for kids. I had to pull back into my brain and like, what, all those descriptions for Skinty Fia, what movie could they also describe? And I came up with Ronin. Do you remember the
Oh, dude, I
1998
like
film
that.
Ronin?
Yes. Oh, I love Ronin.
Yeah.
Yeah, De
Well,
Niro. That's right.
but anyway, it's just a cool heist film.
Love that movie. I think that's a cool choice too. I like that
Oh,
one.
good.
I think, no, I think it's great. The thing I like about it too is that there is an intensity and a mood about it that I think does play well. It does pair well with Skinty Fia. And I went with one that's probably, I don't know. This might be an obscure reference, but there was a movie in 2015 called Brooklyn that was directed by John Crowley, written by Nick Hornby, based on a novel by Irish writer Colm Tobin, and it's about this girl from Ireland who goes to Brooklyn, and it wrestles with a lot of those same themes. Donald Gleason's in it too, but Saoirse Ronan plays the lead actress in it, and it's kind of her story. And it's this this person from Ireland goes to Brooklyn and deals with a lot of the themes that this album seems to be playing with. So that one to me stood out. At first, before I went that deep with it, I was thinking, well, maybe there's an element of Lost in Translation that plays with that, but Lost in Translation has a lighter sort of vibe to it, at least through some of it. There's a little bit of that existential sort of wondering in Lost in Translation. But ultimately, I think Brooklyn is pretty representative of that aspect of the album. Maybe not tonally necessarily, but the idea of being uprooted and wrestling with your identity and kind of deciding where you go as a person, I think is a pretty good representation of that. Do you have a band or artist that you would like to hear cover this album?
Oh gosh, do I? Uh, I think the easiest answer would be Radiohead or
Mm-hmm.
Blur or insert your favorite rock band here, your guitar rock band. But I decided to take a little turn and hop into my fantasy time machine and make something happen that could never exist. And I want to hear Nirvana cover this album
Oh,
with Pat Smear helping on guitar because there's going to be a lot of
yeah.
guitar to cover. So I want to hear Nirvana. And an honorable mention is um, Queens of the Stone Age with Dave Grohl on drums when they were doing that Psalm for the Deaf, that period of Queens of the
Yeah.
Stone Age. That would be an honorable mention.
Oh man, those are fun. I would pay good money to hear that. I think that one that would probably maybe a little too on the nose, and especially like the early comparisons. But I do think I would like to hear Joy Division. I'm also going back in a time machine, and I would like to hear Joy Division cover this. Did the moodiness of it, I think, would be interesting. They would also need a little bit of assistance. I know it toward the end there, Ian Curtis was playing some guitar, but they would probably need a little work there to cover that aspect of it. Or maybe they would just use some synthesizers, and that would be interesting to hear. But Joy Division is a good one. I also think there's a band called Sound or This Sound, and it's a little bit more obscure, but they had several really good albums throughout the 80s where they do have this mood. I think of that first album of theirs, and I feel like there's a bit of a kinship from a tone perspective, the emotional kind of hook of it. I feel like would be really interesting to hear that. So those are my answers. We always have a good time with this next question, but if Fontaines DC was a sports team, uh, who would they be?
Fontaines D.C. is the 2015-2016 Golden State Warriors. And why they are the Golden State Warriors? Well, the 2015-2016 Golden State Warriors set an NBA record for winning 73 regular season games and have now been described as changing modern basketball forever and the way basketball is played. So I was trying to think, okay, who is Fontaines DC? What are they doing? Well, they're modern rock music. They're changing the way modern rock music is played and heard, and forever saying guitar bands are not dead. In the same way, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson said shooting threes is not dead and it hasn't even really been tapped into yet. And so Fontaines DC are the Golden State Warriors.
God, I love that answer. That's so good. I chose to make Fontaines DC a single athlete, and that is Luka Modric. Uh,
Yes. I
it
actually
might
know who
seem
that
like,
is.
hey, I know you know Luka. I think he's actually nearing the end of his career. So not in that extent. I think Fontaines DC still have a lot of road ahead of them, but they might seem like they belong in different worlds. You know, a Croatian midfield maestro. Known for his elegance on the pitch, and then of course the Irish post-punk band known for their raw intensity and poetic grit. I think there's an interesting parallel, though. There is a lot of elegance in that grit. Both can kind of transform these harsh environments, be it a midfield war zone or a post-Brexit Ireland, into something transcendent. I think there's an intellectuality to the way that Luka Modric plays and thinks about the games, expressive, deliberate. I think that's also true of Fontaines DC. Power, whether it's on the field or in the studio, it doesn't have to always be loud. There can be some restraint. Fontaines DC, not overly produced or ornamented. Luka Modric, every pass, every touch is efficient. Cultural ambassadors, I think, is certainly true. Modric kind of symbolizes the resilience, creativity of a small nation punching far above its weight. And then Fontaines DC, obviously proudly Irish, leaning into their heritage, language, politics, identity, not as a gimmick, but as their foundation. So while Modric controls a game and Fontaines DC erupt from your speakers, they both offer the same message. Refinement doesn't mean softness. And poetry can be found in the mud. So that's my takeaway.
I love it.
The Modric Fontaines DC. And our final question: do you take something away from this album more than just a collection of great songs?
Because I've spent so little time with it, that I don't know if I do. I definitely am glad I discovered this album because um, I I think I'm at least a fan of Fontaines DC, and I'm going to check out their other work after spending time with this album. I don't know if I take away something as just an album as a whole, but I do think that it's a good album and at least a collection of great rock songs. What about you?
So for me, this album has themes of isolation, it's homesickness. There's a bitter sort of edge on this album. Sometimes spoken, what I think is through characters, maybe more than through like what it would be Grian chatting, like literally talking about his own thoughts. Yet it also feels warm and comforting in to some extent. This band's always been wise beyond their years, and in Skinty Fia, the musical maturity sort of catches up to the lyrical maturity that they had from the jump. This album belongs to me in a post-punk indie alternative hall of fame, next to Closer by Joy Division, again, the Boxer by The National, the Sounds Jeopardy, which is the first album I mentioned there, or From the Lion's Mouth, from The Sound too, I think is another good one, or an album like In Rainbows by Radiohead. I feel like it belongs in the pantheon of those albums. And I really, again, their follow-up album, definitely, if you're listening to this because you love Skinty Fia, but you haven't given Romance a shot, definitely enjoy it. I do feel like it's the beginning of a new part of the band's life. It's also ambitious. It's a fun album. It's fun in ways that this album is a bit more somber. And I do think it's an evolution for Fontaines DC, one that foreshadows some left turns that the band still has in store. For me, Skinty Fia is more of a culmination of the work the band had done up to this point. And regardless of where they go, this will always be a landmark album for me, not just for the band, but for this era of music. So that's what I take away from this album. It's when I see the shirt, I have a shirt from that tour that I got. It's fun when I see that the album cover and that yellow font on the red background. It's like it evokes a lot to me. And those are some of the things that I just kind of buried in my subconscious after listening to it. I appreciate you sitting with this one. for listening to it, for jotting down your thoughts on it. I know that this was kind of a newer exposure to you, but I appreciate you taking the journey with me. And if you are listening to this, if you have thoughts on Skinty Fia, what are some remarkable things about this album? If you're also a big fan that you think were left on the table that we didn't touch, please let us know in the comments. Answer some of these questions. What sports team is Fontaines D.C? What athlete are they? What band do you want to hear cover this? All this, what movie is this? All the different questions that we answered. We want to hear your responses from this too. And I'm sure we're obviously going to have plenty more album deep dives to come where this came from. So yeah, stick around, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this, and we'll keep it coming. I appreciate it, buddy. Thanks for going down the Fontaines DC wormhole with me.
Dude, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate the homework assignment that turned into something a lot more fun. So this was a blast.